All right, well, before we begin the panel, I just want to take a quick survey from all of you. How many of you have IoT devices, Internet of Things devices, your smart thermostats, maybe you have a Ring, or you have Alexa or Google Home, any of these devices? Okay, good. Smart TV, yeah. Good, so we have a lot of people in this room that are already using these smart devices. There's going to be more and more things that are connected to the internet. Especially with 5G coming out soon, pretty much everything's going to be connected to the internet. Cities are going to start connecting, and a lot of them already have, connecting their critical infrastructure to make sure that they can provide better services for people living in the city. Foxconn has announced that they're partnering with the UW system for innovation around smart cities, so it's coming right here in southeast Wisconsin. So what I want you to think about is this. What if someone was playing around with the sensors of the critical infrastructure of things that you do every day? Think about the things that you do every day. Turning on a faucet, flushing the toilet, driving over a bridge. What happens when somebody's playing with the data that is connected to that? How does that affect your regular lives? So that's what we want to talk about today, is how do we secure ourselves to make sure that our critical data is safe, and that we can continue to do things on our day-to-day basis and improve our lives with smart cities. So with that, I want to introduce the panel. So if each of you could just say who you are, what your expertise is, and what your company does. We'll start with you, Joe.
Cool, thank you. Hi everybody, my name is Joe Linscott. I'm an analyst here at PKware. I work within the product management division, writing product requirements, developing roadmap, things like that. A little bit about PKware. We've been around for over 30 years now, started off in mainframe compression, and have since moved into data security, which we've been doing for the last 15 years. We help our customers today with finding, protecting, and auditing their most sensitive data across their entire enterprise. So from mainframe to modern desktops to mobile devices.
Hi, I'm Nick Loswarniak with P4 Infrastructure. I'm a VP and one of the founders. My two partners are in the audience, Chris and Joe. About a little over a year ago, we were drinking beer and said, hey, we should start our own company and leave our stable careers, and so we did. And we're civil engineers. The three of us are civil engineers, and some of you might be thinking, why are you here? You should be down designing a bridge or something. And we have combined about 6 decades of experience in construction, inspection, and design and research of civil infrastructure assets. So think bridges, roads, water mains, things like that. Along the way, we all had this common goal or common thought that, hey, we have all these IoT devices, we have this ability now. Why can't we measure all this stuff? When we were doing research, we'd spend $60,000 to monitor a bridge for one project and get the data from it, and then that goes in and gets pushed forward to some other code. With all the devices available, we said, hey, we can use these things and actually start doing what we did 10 years ago and do it for really cheap and do some things with it. We're moving towards a data-driven decision-making policy. So municipalities, we're using data now to make decisions. Where in the past, we kind of just went off of experience. Hey, Steve's been here for 20 years, ask him. And we saw a lot of that. And so what we're after is kind of creating the internet of infrastructure and generating that data and helping it improve the civil infrastructure industry.
Thanks, Nick.
I'm Sam Ayton. I co-founded Deep Light Systems back in February. And over the course of that journey, I've had the pleasure of going through Generator's Deep beta program. We were recently accepted into Workbench Labs, which is another accelerator program around extreme power conversions, which the simplest way to describe that is literally making devices smaller. So all your mobile phones, for example, are extreme power conversions for computers and telephones and everything like that. But what got us really started is we knew IoT was this next great thing. Obviously everyone's heard the buzzword around. They know that Internet of Things means something. So I actually set out to explore what it actually means. And I found a lot of it doesn't really mean anything. But the other half of it is that when we talk to manufacturer devices, they all say that they ignore security problems because they don't understand how to deal with it, and there's almost no regulation or anything in the United States for it. And we also knew that the people most vulnerable were small and medium businesses that are using these devices because they're trying to add value to their customers. And it becomes really expensive to try to add security because enterprise security is overly expensive for the most part. And it's overly complicated. And they don't really want to sell to small and medium businesses so they can sell to Target or Walmart, Home Depot, or even companies like Amazon and Microsoft. So we set out to create data-driven, risk management and security monitoring around IoT, network, and people who work at companies to help them, create a game plan and strategize proactively as opposed to reactively around security.
All right, thanks, Sam. And so what we'll do is I'll ask a few questions, and then at the end, I'll open it up to you guys for questions. So think about what questions you want to ask, and at the end, you'll have the opportunity to ask some questions. And if you don't get to ask your question, we'll stick around a little bit afterwards, and you can chat with us. So before we get started, I just want to go over a working definition of what smart cities are. It's a buzzword, so we want to just use a definition so that we're all kind of on the same page. So this is a definition I have adopted from TechTarget. A smart city uses information and communication technologies like IoT devices to increase operational efficiency, share information with the public, and improve both the quality of government services and citizen welfare. So that's the definition that we'll go with today while we're talking about this topic. But let's go ahead and let's start with why do we want to use smart infrastructure? There's a big buzz around smart cities, but why do we want to do it, and how do smart cities improve the quality of government services? What do you think, Joe?
So I could kind of go into a lot of the efficiencies that could be gained with smart cities, but I'd like to highlight just a few of them. So starting with safety, right? How our police force works, from having CCTVs on populated intersections for an ongoing investigation, to having devices that can detect gunshots and pinpoint where the location of that gunshot was, so police can be deployed in an efficient manner. Small things like that can greatly increase the efficiency of our police force. The Milwaukee police force actually already does some of that today. So, transportation, we all drive or ride our bikes or take the bus, and we're all on the road. So with street lights, for example, inserting an LED for cost efficiency and being able to dim the light if no one's available, or increase the glow of the light if there are people there. If the light goes out, having the maintenance team know that the light's out so the LED can be replaced. Waste management. We all take the trash out for the periodic time of the week or every other week. Why not have a device that detects if the garbage collection system is full or not? And instead of having to take it out at a periodic time of the week, you take it out when you need to. And waste management would know when your trash is full and can conduct an optimized route for when to pick up trash that's actually full. Just small things like that we interact with every day that can make city services that much more efficient.
So being an engineer, going through school, they always say, the role of technology is to improve human life, right? So eventually we get to a point where we sit on a beach or do whatever we want, and the robots do our work for us, right? So ultimately we're not there yet, but we're on our way. And smart cities kind of, it's a pretty broad category. It's kind of a new buzzword, and IoT for me when it first came out, I was like, what is that? And they start talking about things, and you get really confused. They just start talking about things talking to things, and you're like, what is that? It really kind of touches everything and measures a lot of stuff. And a lot of what Joe said is similar to what when we look at an infrastructure is say, hey, is there a device we can use for gas leak detection on a natural gas line? What about improving? We can't expand the freeway system forever. We can't make it wider and wider and wider. The whole city will be freeway. So is there something we can do? Take data out of it and say, hey, can we get more traffic through there by optimizing something within that system? Another way that we like to look at it is in terms of accuracy of the operation and maintenance of the facilities. So a city like Milwaukee, you have a massive water treatment plant system and water distribution system. Somehow they have to manage that. They have to make decisions on hey, I got to replace a pump I know in maybe 5 years. That pump costs $1 million. Somehow I got to budget that. How do I do that? How do I know when that pump's going to fail? The goal for P4 is to say, hey, we can make devices, grab the data from it, and we can start to say, we know with 90% accuracy that some pump or some component is going to fail with 90% assurance. And that's really important for municipalities to be efficient and doing less or doing more with less dollars. And that's kind of always, election years, you always hear it, and the news feed's always budgets and budgets and budgets. So a lot of that in there. That's something that can definitely be improved with the smart cities.
So one thing I like to consider about smart cities, first and foremost, is treating a city like an organism, because it's really what it is. There's constant, movement between foot traffic, vehicles, infrastructure, and utilities. And how do you use that to benefit the citizens, the tourists, and the guests that live in the city? So think about Milwaukee, right? It's a city of festivals. We're always having something going on. And you think about in summer when we have tons of street festivals, how do police officers and culture organizations know when to do something, where to do it, how to barricade off streets, how to navigate foot traffic? Or if you think about buildings where the handicap accessibility is in the back, and how do you know where that is? I mean, you can use Google Maps or any other GPS to find a foot traffic path somewhere. But if you can connect that data to those maps and let it know that, okay, I know you're handicapped, so I can point you around this side, send you on a safe and quick way to get there. Or if you think about vehicles, there's so many roads where you kind of have to be careful when you cross, because there's a blind spot for cars and they're always going 15, 20 over the speed limit. So how do you know, maybe it can say, warning, on the foot traffic, like this is, a lot of cars go speeding by, or there's a lot of traffic in this area right now, maybe you want to go around this way. Those are some, simple areas I think smart cities can improve upon it, and I think it also has the greatest effect because what we can feel and react to as people, we know is actually working. So I think that's actually where we have to start with smart cities, to get people on board with everything that's unseen that will improve daily life.
Thanks, Sam. So let's talk a little bit what it means for regular people and businesses. What data can be shared to make people's lives easier, and how can businesses leverage this data?
So for small businesses, at least today, there are services out there that you can go out and pay for a service where you can better identify who your customers are and where they are. Find out what their ethnicity is, their language, their household, their income, all of these things that are services that are available today for small businesses to know who customers are. A lot of that's just data aggregation from mobile app publishers to telcos, ISPs that have been given to companies like Data that give that information out to small businesses to better identify who their customers are. And it's just like these Internet of Things devices that give more of that data to companies like Data to better understand the customers. For regular people, as I've mentioned before, it's your everyday interaction with a city service. Take, for example, city snow plowing, right? Where I want to go out to the grocery store and I can't because the snow on my street has not been plowed. Where instead I can just interact with my mobile application with my city, tell them that it needs to be plowed. I get a notification that it will be plowed at this time, and they'll also alert me. Then I can carry on with my day, and I can better plan for my day. Again, small things like that for regular people and small businesses, it can make it that much more efficient. So.
Thanks, Joe. You heard it from Joe. If anyone wants to make a snow plowing app, there's
they do exist. They do exist. They do exist.
So,
in Minneapolis,
if you want to make a competitor, so a way better one, Joe will test it out for you. So. Thanks, Joe. What do you think, Nick? What do you think about?
So I kind of look at it from the perspective of municipalities and owners of assets. Being a civil engineer, I kind of just always gravitate to looking at things in that way and solving those problems. With living in that space for so long, you just see the issues and it's easy to attack. But with the rollout of 5G, we're gonna have a lot more infrastructure. In terms of hardware, stuff, things like that. But that's going to open up a lot more bandwidth for IoT devices. They're talking big data. We're talking millions of devices taking measurements and sending it somewhere for somebody to analyze or somebody to look at and view. These things are going to, they're going to be much more accessible as time goes on. It's going to develop and mature. They're definitely going to become a powerful tool for the owners of physical assets, municipalities, cities, to start measuring those things. And what I was talking about in the previous question is really start making their processes more efficient. And it could be as simple as taking pedestrian data and where people are walking and, hey, do we need a new sidewalk, or something as simple as that. Somebody can actually manage it. Because believe it or not, City of Milwaukee manages every little aspect of it, even if it seems something as simple as a sidewalk. They go through and level sidewalks, on a regular basis so people don't trip. But things like that, and that kind of ties into asset management tools. And the city of Milwaukee has a massive amount of assets. They have roads everywhere, they have street lights, signals, and everything else you can think of. Pretty much when you go home tonight, you're going to be on some part of the asset that belongs to Milwaukee. Well, how do you manage all that? And it's tough. Milwaukee has, city of Milwaukee itself, and they have a large staff, and that staff does nothing but manage. And again, it's that doing more with less money, less budget. And that's kind of what those tools are going to bring to the consumer, bring to the community to help kind of improve their lives.
Thanks, Nate.
So, kind of tapping into, everyone kind of said something about 5G. I think with 5G and, localizing data and cooperation between, small and medium businesses as well as, the municipal governments, you can actually create, shared data access points that can tap into, applications and services and businesses. Like, let's say you want to do your laundry and find out the laundromat is closed or it's full, but you walk by another one that you could have went to, but it's not your regular spot. That's information that could be sent to your phone, when you're thinking about doing laundry. If you have a scheduling system, or a calendar system, be able to, figure things out with businesses that way. And also too, like if you're thinking about restaurants, right? I'm going to a restaurant, oh, it's closed, but we have access to data across all these businesses, so it's going to aggregate that and tell you, if you're going to an Italian place, well, there's another Italian place that has seats available, similar price, similar taste, maybe you might not do it. But I think it eliminates a lot of frustration and also actually improves the overall revenue of a city that way, which can also go back into the government to also improve existing infrastructure and build it up through those partnerships, which I know is something that P4 has been touching on a lot right now with utilities, trying to do that with the service and lifestyle industry as well.
Thanks, Sam. So midterm elections just happened, and I just read, or I was reading part of a paper, I shouldn't say I read the whole thing, but Pricewater Clearinghouse put together a paper, and they were talking about the most likelihood of the next things to be regulated, and the number one thing was cybersecurity. And so let's talk a little bit about what are some of the risks in connecting our critical infrastructure. What can happen to data when it gets into the wrong hands?
So this is probably the scariest question, at least for me, because putting infrastructure online means that your attacker is not in a physical sense there, it's online. You see it in the headlines already today, whether it's the Chinese or the Russian hacker or whatever X country you can fill it in, or if it's even us. Putting your infrastructure online means that your highest attacker is the nation state. It's the attacker that has unlimited funds and then limited resources to find holes and to exploit those holes. Normally when you read about it today, or how they do it today, is mostly it's just auditing, right? They're just trying to gather as much information as possible. The other end of that is to plant malware for whatever future case they might need it for, whether it's for a war scenario, battle scenario, whatever it might be. And so when we're talking about putting devices online, our energy grid online, our water supply online, we need to be very precautious for how we do it, because like I said, it's the highest attack vector. It's the most skilled and highest supplied attack vector. It's the nation state. So
When we develop our devices, we kind of look at data in two different divisions. I call one property data. I might be using the wrong nomenclature, but my engineering background says property data. So I kind of, in that basket, I kind of group things like temperature, pressure, humidity, where you're taking a measurement and you're storing it. And so we look at security from a security standpoint. It's like, okay, well, some hacker wants to break into my house and get my temperature data from my Nest thermostat. I'm like, have at it. I'll save you a step. I'll give it to you. I'll give you my password. Just don't turn the heat up too much in the winter. I'll try to save money here. So it's not a big deal, right? But it could, something as mundane like that could actually be a risk. And if you look at airports, they have pavement temperature sensors on the runways, and they're used for determining when they need to de-ice. The de-icing chemical they use at an airport is really expensive, and they rely on temperature sensors to say, hey, our pavement's getting down to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, it's going to freeze. We need to go de-ice. Somebody were to hack in, start spoofing the data, maybe the administrator looks at it and says, hey, it's 38 degrees Fahrenheit, we don't need to de-ice. Now you got planes landing on icy runways. So something that seems simple like a temperature data can actually become a problem when there's reactive action. You know, when there's an action that's being reacted to from that data. The other one, which is the other group of data, is a little bit, I'll call it scarier, as Joe had mentioned. But that's when we start to use IoT devices to actually control things. So let's think about controlling a valve on a water main. Let's think about controlling traffic signals, lift bridges, something like that. Obviously, we do not want anybody getting into that, what we'll call critical controls. For obvious reason, that would be really bad. So really securing those down is going to be very important, and making sure that nobody gets their hands on it or gains control of that system.
I always see the biggest risk as people because we all make mistakes. And obviously it's nonsensical to assume that we're all going to have an awareness of everything going on with IoT, with data, with applications. I mean, most people would rather just leave their phone unlocked or use a swipe unlock than use a password because, well, it's my phone, you know, but people do leave it around. You know, I see people leaving their laptops out at cafes all the time, and they do get stolen. So as we kind of create more access to data in smart cities, a really big problem I think we're going to see is making sure that people aren't allowed to misuse that data, whether it's intentional or not. Because at the end of the day, you know, Nick was saying, you know, you can do really dangerous things with that. But it could also be, you know, maybe even if you can't actually break into something, you could make it look like you did to disrupt infrastructure. You could set off an alarm in a store across the street so you could break into the one, you know, over there so that you mislead the police. These are opportunities, you know, it's not just movies and video games anymore. These are going to be realities, you know. There is that risk kind of running into, you know, this dystopian, you know, Milwaukee, how weird that would be. But it's a real possibility, you know, we're not that far away from it. Researchers say we're, you know, 10 to 15 years away from smart cities being normality. Technology is moving faster than our ability to understand it. In the moment we create artificial intelligence that can create technology for us, it's really going to be hands off. We're going to be observers as opposed to the, you know, integrators. Our job is to make sure it doesn't do anything wrong, but, you know, you can't necessarily be sure of that. So I think putting proper precautions in place, you know, I think it's kind of the mantra that all three of us have really said is to make sure that we're doing things right, that we're cautious about it, and that we're not, you know, being stupid just so we make some money out of it. So.
Wow, I was scared when he said de-icing of planes, and then he said we got the AI making the programs and we're just watching it happen. So.
It doesn't have to be bad, it was just that the robots do our work and we just relax all day.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about, okay, with smart cities you have a lot of partnerships between the public and private entities. How do you verify shared responsibility and accountability between the two entities?
I guess I'll go again.
Yeah, should we go reverse?
No, this is fine. This is great. So I think it's important when we come to private and public partnerships, data is probably one of the key points, right, in how that's handled and who actually maintains it and keeps it. And so I think it's really important that since it's public data, you're monitoring civilians for a city, that the public has a greater say in how the data is handled. You see this in places like Toronto or Estonia or elsewhere in the world where there are actual committees that have been voted on for a data trust committee where they have say in all of the city services that are adapting IoT devices or adapting new technologies that monitor their citizens. So something like a data trust committee I think is very key to representing what the public believes should be happening with their data. Just a point on this, or not so much as a foreshadow, but just as a key point in the Western Hemisphere. Today we have Toronto, where Toronto is partnering with Google's sister company, Sidewalk Labs. It was recently, they've been doing it, planning for a little over a year, but they have been putting forth plans, every quarter. And there was the most recent one, which was a few weeks ago, where the privacy expert of this committee actually stepped down. and said that there was zero transparency with the process that was happening, and that Sidewalk Labs, while agreed to not take in data or would anonymize the data, they could not promise that their third-party vendors would not do this. So the privacy expert, Anne, I forget her last name, but had stepped down in protest of this. So it's just something to think about. It's a data point to think about that there are already we're already moving this way. Let's look at what's already happened and how other people have implemented this.
And I think the committees are a great way to do that. You know, in the tech industry, it seems like there's a lot of collaboration that goes together, and everybody kind of works together. Me coming from my contracting days, I know it sounds really exciting, but contracts. Somewhere in there's going to be some contracts written between the public entities and the private entities. So, for example, it might be the city of Milwaukee and AT&T or Verizon as a service provider, and working together because they're going to have to share right-of-ways and allow the hardware component to be installed. And unfortunately, contracts is necessary evil, but making sure that risk is balanced between the contracts, allowing them to be a little bit more collaborative and kind of divide that risk equally is always a positive thing. Is shifting the risk around. Construction, it's all the time. Everybody's pushing risk. Nobody wants to take the risk, but when you push the risk on somebody, you're going to end up paying more for that. But there's things that we can do in that contract to make sure that people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. That the private entity is upholding the terms of the contract that was written to the public entity, which ultimately serves the community and the taxpayers. So it's important. I think the honest collaboration between the partners is probably going to be very important, and you kind of you have to have that trust and the blind faith in to do that and follow through with it. But there's other things we can do in terms of the hardware and the operation of a smart city. We can use more IoT devices to actually measure and actually create a scorecard or a metric to actually measure it and hit performance goals. That's kind of at the heart of like public-private partnerships, which are gaining more traction in cities and in the nation. That's an important part is having a scorecard to say, hey, are you meeting the scorecard because the scorecard's tied to the contract? And if you don't, then maybe you miss a performance payment. Things like that, because at the end of the day, somebody's paying somebody for the service, right? The other thing that we learned at DigiCities, which was DigiCities is a group that's promoting smart cities, and they had some really good information about zoning and permitting. Something kind of get carried away with, but getting ready for smart cities and taking you're gonna have 5G hardware I mentioned, but updating permitting and zoning rules to accommodate it so it's easy and kind of runs smoothly, because there can be a lot of gray areas in there. So that last part of permitting is kind of boring, but it's another evil of every municipality.
So when I think about public-private partnerships, I really think about two concepts in smart cities. The first is identity governance, and by that I mean being able to literally govern the identification of every device, every data record, and how people are accessing it, be able to verify that it's unique, that it's not being replicated, that it's not being done, unlawfully or by going around regulations. That's something that's already being, done in the cloud and on hardware. You have the MAC address, but stuff like that is kind of easy to get around, and it's not necessarily, unique. So being able to create unique identifications for everything is a good step, and also being able to decentralize that data so that you can actually guarantee shared ownership. Because I firmly believe that the person who owns the data is literally whoever can access it. That's the reality of it. I mean, the legality of it is one thing, but I mean, how likely is it that you're going to stop every hacker from accessing things? Very little. I mean, the Bank of Bangladesh, the Federal Reserve Bank allowed them to withdraw $1 billion, except it was a fraudulent request, and it didn't go to the Bank of Bangladesh. Most of that money was recovered, but still, this is the Federal Reserve. That's the entire backbone of the United States monetary system that was willfully giving out money to another country, except it was a hacker based in China working for North Korea. And by decentralizing that data, you think about open source software, where a lot of licenses make it so that when you create a software and you modify it, you have to give that modification back to the public. That ownership over data is important because, in 2017, more than 7 billion records were lost or stolen. A lot of that came out of healthcare, out of education, out of finance. And I mean, if you think about having an identity breach, that's a 2, 3, 5-year process. Maybe you never fully recover that information. Hackers will sit on this stuff for 7 years, if not longer, patiently waiting to how to use it. So being able to decentralize and govern, data access and identities around it, I think is the first, major step to allowing public-private partnerships and to really driving benefits through that with, things like what Joe and Nicholas said.
Thanks, guys. We talked a little bit about the risks of connecting our critical infrastructure. What are some of the best practices for securing data? How should we design smart cities and think about security as we build them rather than an afterthought?
So when thinking about, sorry, I just kind of
Go ahead.
But when thinking about security and implementing it, you have to think about what the attack vector is or who your attackers are. As I mentioned earlier, the attacker is the nation state. So you need to think about security as a core foundation of how you design your smart city, your Internet of Things, or devices that you will implement into your city. And so security by design is the kind of buzzword here. Security by design, if those of you who aren't familiar, is just at every step of the process, or software development process, or hardware development process, you have a foundation that security is the foundation of every step, from planning, development, testing, deployment, and maintenance. So without anything specific, smart security by design is kind of the way that you want to, I guess, develop and maintain a smart city.
So when, civil engineer here, so I got some programming skills. I can be really dangerous. So when we develop things, PKware and DeepLight are going to love, they love companies like us because we keep them employed. and that's where the acknowledgement of that weakness on our part is it's okay that we're weak in that because we're going to rely on partners to do that. And it's not, there's a lot of hardware developers and software developers out there. They're not all security experts. And I think that, from my perspective, it's relying on the partners to do that. Having PKware or DeepLight Systems, having their software and having their work as part of it is going to be crucial.
I think a big part of securing smart cities is to actually remove barriers around cybersecurity. The staple mindset is security by obscurity or security theater. One of the best examples that everyone in the space throws around is the TSA at the airport. Most documentation will literally tell you that they really haven't stopped a single or verified a single terrorist attack going through since they implemented it, but it makes people feel that there's safety precautions in place, that people are doing their jobs. And if people are using security software measures that are customized, they're keeping it secret, so they don't actually know if someone could go out there and test their vulnerabilities for them. They'd rather not have that because they're worried about hackers doing it. But if you think about it, it's kind of ironic because then you're saying you don't want to actually verify whether or not your security is in place. It's like contracting someone to build a wall around your house and never going outside to see if it's there. So I think a big part of that comes down to information sharing. So creating, there are standards in place already, but we need more regulation around it as well to ensure that people are sharing information about breaches. If, Target was breached in 2013 through their, HVAC system, the air control conditioning system. I guarantee you Walmart was terrified when they heard about that and do everything they could to make sure it didn't happen to them. But if people were able to spot those things beforehand and share it, then everyone can start showing up, because security isn't about competitiveness, even though it's kind of like that right now. It's about keeping everyone safe, because it really comes down to the weakest link. If one person in a smart city is vulnerable, they can take the entire system down. And that's the real part about it. So making sure you have that shared responsibility, shared ownership of data, and all of that is important.
Well, that leads right into our next question. So how do we effectively create community where we can share and communicate the holes that need to be patched? So how do we do that? How do we make that community?
So I think with this kind of answer that I'll give here, money talks is the summary. But a decade ago, you could have watched videos of DEF CON or Black Hat or some other hacker conference where they're giving a zero-day exploit on stage and everyone's oohing and eyeing, and it's kind of crazy, right? Because it's Windows OS. They still have to develop, plan, test, and deploy out this patch to millions of users, and so everyone's in a craze to start using it. Fast forward to today, and someone's giving a zero-day exploit from last year that they told the vendor about. The vendor went and tested it, they deployed it, and it's on millions of devices already. But here they are giving the talk about the exploit. So what changed? Well, companies, private entities like Tesla, Google, AWS, etc., went out and became more proactive with hacking communities. They said, actually, we're not going to penalize you for using our software and hacking into it. Instead, they give out bug bounties. They give out funding for these kind of communities. And so I think that kind of partnership has really come out well. Especially going to conferences now, and it's like the exploits aren't as great, and if they are, have already been patched, right? It's already been communicated to the manufacturer vendor. So I think that kind of partnership with how we reward hacking communities and hackers for the work that they're doing is the best way forward.
So communication of the issues is always huge. Again, from our perspective, it's relying on third parties. What I maybe envisioned is, you're going to have this partnership between the public and private entities, and there's going to be a collaboration between them. And maybe there's a board that is constantly looking at it. But is it possible to actually hire a third-party entity that all they do is just try to detect vulnerabilities? So analogous to what Joe was saying is, instead of putting a bounty, maybe actually hire somebody as a consultant, and that's all they do to maintain and manage the system. And then, much like cell phones, to get a device to use, like say Verizon or AT&T system, it has to be certified for use. And I think, as a second part here is devices that are going to be put on the smart city, network and architecture, and then infrastructure probably should be certified for use on that network. And one of the things that can be done is, embedding software or hardware on the device to try to prevent and increase the security of it.
Yeah, I think events like this are really ground zero for these types of implementations. If you think about it, what Joe was saying about committees and things like that, just finding ways to get the government, concerned citizens, private partners together in a room to talk about their concerns and figure out what verifications can be put in place. How do you certify something? What standards do you look for? How do you evolve those standards with everything that's changing? And of course, how do you get people to care about them too and be aware of the risks? Because again, there's only so many hours in a day. There's only so much information we're able to contain within a reasonable amount of time before we forget it. So being able to have open discussions, not just on a regular basis, but whenever someone's concerned, I think that's more important than meeting once or twice a year. Is if people are saying like, yeah, we need to talk about this subject, finding ways for them to get in touch if they're not even necessarily in the same place, through conferencing or whatever. Just finding ways to create those open forums and create awareness and push for public opinion, because I think the driving force for security is always going to be empathy. Once you figure out that everyone's in the same boat as you, if there's a hole in the ship, you want to plug it up.
All right, well, thanks, guys. So now we want to open it up to questions from the audience. What questions do you guys have? First hand up right here. What do you got?
So, no pressure.
No pressure.
Should have kept my hand down. So we've all experienced potholes. We've all experienced signs that are broken. We've all experienced infrastructure currently falling away. And one of the big things that came out was the Intel chipset issue in the last year. How do we keep smart cities infrastructure up to date when the vulnerabilities that happen could happen 5 or 10 years from now, and there's no budget to replace all of those devices in the city?
Good luck answering that.
That's a tough one. I mean, it's going to be a huge cost. Is probably the problem, right? So we're already with strained budgets. How do we do it? And the easiest way to do it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but to deploy an over-the-air update to that device to try to connect the vulnerability. But if it's a hardware issue like the Intel one, I don't know if there's much you could do without short of replacing the device. But maybe I don't know.
You can take a performance hit, that's for sure, if you're on an Intel chip or an AMD, right? So, no, I think the important part here for patching systems and the money around that, I think we can take a look at something like Windows 10, where I'm sure you're all aware of how updates work with Windows 10, where it'll automatically restart, and it's like 3 hours later, are you kidding me? Why is this happening? And the reason why it's happening is because of your question, where they want your system up to date. To attack the latest, or not to attack, but to protect you against the latest 0-day. And in the end, they say it's good, but I also believe them. It is good. It is good to have up-to-date patch systems. And so when we're talking about Internet of Things devices, they need to be online and they need to be patchable over the web. And that's to, one, decrease costs, but two, to keep us safe. So.
Can you talk a little bit about what a zero-day threat is,
Oh yeah, I've been saying that a lot. It's just something that's that can basically take over full admin rights of a machine, right? So, does that make sense? Is that good? Yeah, thanks.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned the CCTV, and how do you balance that sort of thing with privacy rights in the United States? I know it's common in England, but I shudder every time I see that on TV.
I'm right there. No,
Repeat the question.
Oh, yeah. The question was how do we balance privacy rights with things like CCTVs, where you're being monitored? Is that kind of? And I think it just comes down to what I mentioned earlier with the committees. It's up to the people at the end of the day for how they want their data to be handled and who handles it, right? So having a committee that perfectly represents the people, while somewhat imperfect, but is very important, because while you and I might not want someone to monitor us on the streets, there might be a community far away in whether it's China or India that actually does like that, and they like that idea, and that's totally fine. And that's why a data trust committee would evaluate and respect and what's the word I'm looking for? Represent their servants, so their citizens. So, yeah.
I actually kind of have a thing to add on to that. So there was a viral video that went on about some like town in Colorado where they had a connected camera looking over this one intersection. And people had open comments to it, so everyone was making fascinations like, oh, this person ran a red light, you know, and they would be getting all this weird stuff they were saying about that. But I think to that sense, you know, if it's a public camera, I think there shouldn't be any reason why people shouldn't be able to look at it too. And I think creating that level of access, even if it's kind of a little bit superficial, lets you know that at the very least you can actually see what they're seeing. And if you're concerned about a particular location for any reason, you know, being able to report that and say, you know, this camera, you know, is in this spot where, you know, it's like looking into my home, I don't like that. I think that's, you know, a way you can go around those problems too.
Thanks. I saw your hand up.
Yeah. So I have a question for Nicholas. So I understand that your company works on infrastructure and products that help us connect to the future of smart cities. So my question to you is, to what extent do your products / software protect against cyber threats?
So what we do is when we program and develop the devices, we're using technologies that have, you know, standards that already exist. So whether it be Wi-Fi or LoRa or cellular technology, we rely on the security and the encryption that's built into those protocols, so that when we're transmitting data, that you know, we're using that protocol to encrypt that data, so it's secure. Some of the other things we can do is use different wireless technologies that are maybe not well known yet. And if somebody, it's kind of what Sam alluded to earlier, is that if the hacker doesn't know it exists, it's pretty hard to hack, right? It's kind of like Apple computers, you know, they're always more secure, you know, a decade ago, right? Because nobody hacked them, everybody hacked PC. Now it's kind of the inverse almost. So that's how we're, you know, keeping those devices secure.
Go ahead.
Hi guys, on the subject of 5G. So, you know, I'm reading and going worldwide and seeing a massive issue with the idea of microcells or boosters that are going to be able to handle all of this data and this speed to a massive amount, right? And now you've got public domain or eminent domain issues in these cities, which is crazy. So, you know, it's everything from putting a box in a park to you can't put this on my street corner to I was just in Los Angeles and there's some ugly poles going up all over the place where they're having to go down in the ground to anchor them and bring cabling up, and then on the top there's some kind of a device. What are you guys seeing as municipal moves to alleviate that, address that? Because to me, 5G goes nowhere unless you have that infrastructure installed, and there aren't anywhere near enough towers in the existing system to handle this. Where do we go with this from a municipal approval standpoint to get this to happen?
Well, it's kind of funny you asked that because P4 has a really great design for one of the engineered systems we're developing is actually a monotube pole, I'll call it, which is a fancy term for the pole that holds your traffic signals and lights and stuff. And what we see is, yeah, the pole, we call it pole pollution. You see them, and it does become a big problem on some of the newer freeway projects. There's poles everywhere. Where do you mount it? So we're going to stand a new pole for every small cell for 5G. We should be able to attach it to something that's existing. The product we've actually developed actually kind of accommodates that. It accommodates a wide range of loads, and we can consolidate traffic signals and freeway and street lighting into one pole and minimize that. So that's one way we can do that. The other thing is, when we look at utilities, they have agreements with the municipalities. So if We Energies is going to use City of Milwaukee's right of way to put in conduits for electricity, what Milwaukee gets in exchange is they still pay electricity rates, but when they have a new facility and they need a new electrical service, say for a new building, new apartment building, that's for free. Whereas other municipalities, like say, I'm trying to use an example, maybe I shouldn't, but there's other municipalities that when they need a new electrical service, they have to pay for that, and it's a big number. So and I actually kind of thought about this yesterday is when I was kind of reviewing these questions, and what they came to mind is when they put up a small cell, what's to keep them from putting a logo or something on it, right? Maybe somebody doesn't want to see that. So I think from an administrative standpoint, the municipalities are going to have to allow the service providers to use their right-of-ways to install that infrastructure. So City of Milwaukee is going to have some sort of agreement with them, and there's going to have to be some rules on it, and some just ground rules, and say, hey, you can't put logos, or it's got to be painted this color. It's not fun to have to do that, to write that as requirements, but unfortunately we have to do that and get the public opinion to make sure we install that. Unfortunately, that's a battle that's fought every day in civil engineering when it comes to utilities.
What if that doesn't exist? Say that you're building another section of the city, a new suburb, et cetera, and We Energies, for instance, doesn't have their existing pole infrastructure in place. Now you're talking about going to that municipality, and that developer is going to that municipality and saying, we want an eminent domain, 50 microcells in this new community, and you get major pushback.
Yeah, that's eminent domain. That's always a touchy. I don't even know if I want to touch that one because it is a touchy subject, and the Zoo Interchange was a good example where they're trying to do eminent domain on a lot of things, and there's a lot of fallout that I haven't checked in on it, but I guarantee that fallout's still going on. When I say fallout, I mean the lawsuits, and it's tough because we saw it at Foxconn too. People didn't want to sell their homes, but hey, Foxconn's coming in. It's for the betterment of Wisconsin. We're going to give you fair market value for a home, and we need to take it. And there's nothing you can do about it because we're bringing in Foxconn. It's a tough one. With the small cells, it's going to be tough, and I think it's going to be a case by case basis. I'd have to think about that one even more to really come up. It's not easy.
We're in the street lighting business, and we have a product that is NEMA plugged into the top of the street light, and it's the first and only patented micro cell that can go on a street light. So it's pretty cool, but we're dealing with those same issues of who owns the light, who owns the pole. That makes it easy because it's already in and it's a municipal functioning piece of equipment. But when somebody says, well, take this box and put it over in the side of this park, or put it off to the side of the street in the corner, who do you go to for approval, and who owns that, who operates it, et cetera? Yeah,
and even if it's a public entity, public owner, they're willing to allow them to use that. I mean, that's how Clear Channel and advertising work with billboards. They're willing to do it. Unfortunately, that could take a year to get that agreement through, and that just delays construction. I've seen it many times.
Other questions?
Where do you, in the public domain security trade-off and ultimate benefit, the public access to medical records for a person that's traveling and all of a sudden winds up in the emergency room in an area he doesn't live in and his main doctor is 500 miles away.
I think, so kind of touched on what I was saying earlier about decentralizing data and creating standards for shared ownership of data. There's already some things like that they're trying to protect with, things like HIPAA and high tech. But obviously, again, most standards are about punishing people for making mistakes as opposed to preventing them from making those mistakes. And I always find that scary when it comes to medical or financial records. So again, I think when you decentralize data and create actual standards for how they're being communicated that are unique from typical, like HTTP, which is how things on the web communicate, is where that starts. But it's a difficult conversation to have because you got to get everyone in the industry to agree before it really goes to the government. You think about building automation, so like your air conditioning, your boilers, and whatever. Back in the the 90s, they agreed to use a standard called BACnet for that. And they're still using it today across over 1,500 manufacturers, even though it's not very secure, and hackers are finding ways to exploit it. So being able to speed up the process of creating new standards and promoting them, and maybe finding creative ways to incentivize companies to start adopting them before the government can put regulations in place is a big start. But it's a tough subject, especially when everything's about reactivity as opposed to proactivity.
And Sam, when you talk about decentralizing,
Yeah, so,
what would you propose? If you're in charge today, what would you do?
So I would use the example. So somewhere in DC, I'll just give you this, and I'll
Yes.
start it because it's on my mind too. Is that somewhere in Washington DC, maybe there's a computer system there, and it has every single one of our Social Security numbers on it.
well, that's a very
That
good
would be a
example.
very centralized system, right?
So, I mean, to use, probably the most hot topic example is blockchain, where they literally pull data apart and throw it across the entire network that it's on, the framework it's on. Like, you literally can't do anything with one piece. It's like literally taking a puzzle and spreading all the pieces around the world. Like, good luck putting that all back together unless you know where to all meet up and communicate and coordinate. That's how blockchain actually works. So being able to do that where it's no longer about sitting on a DC server, but sitting across a network, treating a network as a single computer, which is how Google actually treats their entire network nowadays, really, is kind of how you get that started. Of course, the trouble is, optimizing systems, having operating systems that communicate over similar standards, which they're starting to do now because people realize that, some people have a Windows computer, but they have a, Apple phone, so they want to be able to communicate between the two, so they're figuring out better ways to do that. But recently, Microsoft actually kind of broke the rule because they made a Linux-based operating system for IoT devices. Now, if anyone remembers one of the former CEOs who literally called Linux evil. He said open source was like the devil. That's basically the words he used. And now they're doing it because they realized that they have to be able to communicate across the systems. They made .NET, which is one of their frameworks for development, open source, so that everyone can use it across their systems to create better standardization across software. I think that's kind of how you start with decentralizing data, is figuring out what are we going to use to do it. Whether it's blockchain, who knows?
Thanks. Other questions? I saw your hand up.
Yes. Are you aware of any third-party monetization of this civic data yet? And if not, is there anything preventing cities from becoming advertising companies themselves?
I can't think of anything off the top of my head where that's been used. That always comes across, as we work and move forward with our products, it's something that always crosses our mind because you do see, in other spaces, you see somebody maybe selling data to insurance companies, something like that. But off the top of my head, I'm trying to think, but maybe I'll think of it afterwards. But I don't think of anything that I've seen because it kind of goes back to civil infrastructure, with what we do. Does anybody really want to know the status of a bridge, what's going on with it? But you'd be surprised. You think that, it's just maybe it's 6 months down the road, somebody comes up to you and says, hey, can I buy that? And definitely if, we'd have to review it and say, hey, can we sell this data? It doesn't attach any personal information for anybody. And they really can't do anything dangerous with it, so why not? It's more revenue for the city, right? So I'm definitely, in terms of should we do it, I think we should as long as it's safe and we're not attaching anything sensitive to it.
I think the closest use case for this, at least in North America, is Toronto with what's happening there, where you have one of the largest advertising companies in the world, Google, working alongside with Toronto to implement new IoT deployments, right, and working with third-party companies I mentioned before when I answered one of the questions where the sister company of Google said that they weren't going to collect the data, but other companies they couldn't control, and they might. And so I think that it's something to look into, and I think as we move forward, it'll become a bigger problem with more of these private entities that say, oh, hey, we'll help you create a smart city, and then the turnaround to that is the monetization of citizen data that they gather.
All right, I think we got time for maybe 2 more questions. So I think you guys can be the last 2. So who wants to go? We'll have you go first. I guess I saw your hand up last time. So.
My question is for Sam. So you all know there's currently an ongoing case of Mueller investigation, and one could say that that's a threat to American state sovereignty. So I understand that you are a CEO of a company, and I wonder what challenges on a personal level that your company faces in regard to sovereignty.
Sovereignty?
Yes, like so cybersecurity, with the ongoing SBS investigation, could have had a huge impact. So I'm wondering, as a company, what kind of issues like that do you have to worry about?
That's actually, a tough question to answer. I don't know that really we're far enough along where we've experienced that as a problem. But I mean, I can tell you for a fact that, probably don't share this with any of your friends, but we've seen devices in any other country, right? Oh, well, of course you're filming. Too late. But that's the reality, right? Is that, how does sovereignty, how does ownership come into play with anything? How are we affected by that? And when it comes to that, one thing I will tell you though is we discover a problem, we as, ethical hackers, as you might call it, it's, perfect. They turn off automatically, but Allie got it, so, but we have an ethical responsibility to let someone know within 24 hours at the very least. We try to do it as soon as possible. We've done it for a county government, we've done it for a university. Now the county wanted to, light our seats on fire at first until they figured out it was actually a problem for them. And then the university, they ignored us. So that's kind of the really problems we're running into in that sense, is that how do you communicate these issues? How do you get information across? And how do you show people that, you are the good guys? Because it's because with like phishing attacks, everyone can say I'm here to help you when they're really not, That they're trying to find better ways to verify whether or not it's a problem. They might pretend to be good guys just so they can find the deeper root of the issue. If that answers your question, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then this will be our last question. Great.
Action. You guys mentioned data and ownership and kind of monetizing it, and the 4 letters that came to my mind were GDPR. Does that solve the problem? Is that more of a problem, especially when we start to get into, you mentioned trash collecting. Do I want my government to know when I'm home and when my trash is full? Because maybe they know that I had a party and now there's a noise complaint in my neighborhood and now I get a ticket. Like, how do we figure out the line, and how do we figure out who owns it, and who controls what's right with the data we're collecting?
I think new policies have to be put in place for all of these data aggregators and where it's going to and how it's maintained. I don't think something like GDPR, where it's more meant for private entities that are handling data to try to get them in line, whether that's like a Facebook or a Google, but more specifically for how cities operate and how they work in partnership with private entities. And so there just needs to be more of a push for policies in place for controlling, maintaining, and working with the public on how to maintain that data. So.
You want? Yeah, well, I was gonna say, with what you're talking about with that example, what you're doing is you're taking, say, noise complaint, which might come from, let's say, police department, and trash collection, which would come from public works department, right? So one policy thing that could be done is to say, hey, we're not gonna merge these 2 data streams. We're not gonna analyze them because, it kind of becomes that big brother scenario, right? Because now you're taking 2 data streams which are completely, totally unrelated in the past, and now somebody has the ability has access to those data streams, and now combine them and start data mining, and then actually pulling information from it and connecting dots, and it's something people might not want, right? And I think it's a lot of policy, and that's part of the development of the smart city. And DigiCity is going around, educating and kind of filling the blanks because those things are needed. They also talked about the zoning and right-of-way use. There's a lot of questions like that have to be answered, and it's part of the development, I think, of the smart city system.
But isn't that the power? Like, merging data streams gives me possibility?
Yeah, I just don't know if you can merge certain ones, but there's certain ones you don't want to merge, right? So healthcare data and maybe police reporting you don't want to merge.
Yeah.
You don't want to merge those, but healthcare is obviously one that's totally private. But yeah, when do you and when don't you? And then you also have to rely that they're not doing it, right? Because you always hear stuff, we don't do this, and then in the back of your mind you're like, yeah, you do. Maybe whatever you're doing online, it's we don't collect data. It's like, yeah, sure.
One thing I was going to add to that is, I did a talk on privacy included GDPR in that with the Wisconsin Technology Association, and I feel like I'm in the minority of people actually think GDPR is creating more solutions than it's solving problems. Just because I think it's brilliant that you can opt out of data collection. Even though a lot of people might not actually really let you do it, they might fake it or find ways around it, loopholes. I think that's something you're going to be able to see for non-critical data collection is to let people opt out of it. Obviously for things like maybe law enforcement and healthcare, they might not just because they feel like they have an ethical responsibility to collect that data. But when it comes to things like combining data and stuff like that, I think you should be able to control like you do on your phone, all your settings and stuff like that. You should be with your apps. You should be able to do the same thing with your personal data to let. It's like opting. It's like the argument right between should we force people to become donors on their license plate or do we have an opt-in, opt-out? It's a tough question to answer because a lot of it is arbitrary and a lot of it is also up to public opinion, whether or not there is a strong data to support an argument. At the end of the day, it comes down to public opinion more than anything, I believe.
All right. Well, thank you. Let's give a big hand to our panelists. I forgot in the beginning I was supposed to give Deepak the floor to talk a little bit about Startup Week. So
it's no problem at all.
Got up here and everyone was staring at me.
You want
Okay, I gotta go. So
over to the final slide for that.
It won't work for me.
Yeah. There we go.
It's no problem at all. The important thing was to be able to discuss about the critical thing you all came here to learn about, which is basically security, and to learn about what Deep Light System and people, all the people who are here, and what they are really talking about. They are talking about the security. We learned a lot of things across, in last 1 hour, and very excited to be able to learn about everything. Right? We all know, right? When Industrial Revolution came about, a lot of changes came into the world. Everything that we heard about. When the internet came, there are a lot of other things came about. The next world is about smart cities and IoTs. Security is always going to be a fundamental constraint. That is what we have learned from this across the thing. What I really wanted to talk about was just Startup Milwaukee. I'm sure many of you have heard, and some of you were encouraged to come here just because of the kind of things that are happening around Milwaukee to support startups. So I'm, as a volunteer, just representing Startup Milwaukee to support the activities that is happening around here. I wanted to personally thank Deep Light Systems and PKWare and P4 for organizing this whole event. And also remind you that there is this year we have 70 plus events that happen with 50 plus companies that are partnering across in Milwaukee alone. In fact, it is, if you look at this year, we had about 200 plus events happening across Wisconsin. This has gone way beyond what we had even imagined. So that is why some of us have stepped in to help with the volume of events that is coming. With that, I wanted to let you know, Milwaukee Startup Week was presented by Advocate Aurora Health. All the sponsors that you can see on that banner down below, over there, Northwestern Mutual, Concordia University, Hush Blackwell, they're all equal partners in this whole process of encouraging startups. And the reason you guys are here is to talk to people, meet people, learn about what other people are doing, and hopefully all of us together can improve the startup ecosystem in this region. Okay, with that, thank you very much.
And I also want to thank Dan, who live streamed this for us, so thank you, Dan. And then also, if you just want to give some feedback on what you thought of the presentation, go to survey.mke.deeplight.systems. And again, if you took any pictures and want to post it on Facebook or Twitter, use the hashtag SmartCitiesMKE And yeah, thank you all for coming. We'll stick around for about another half hour, so if you want to talk to us and grab a beer, or if there's any pizza left, I might grab a slice. Maybe you want to. But yeah, all right. Well, yeah, thank you all, and yeah, we'll be around to mingle for about a half hour.